Hey, how are you guys? We're very lucky to have Marc Kanter and Michael Jones speaking to us today about how to brand your residency and using social media. To introduce them, Dr. Michael Jones is the Vice Chair for Education and Residency Program Director in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Albert Einstein Jacobi Montefiore in the Bronx. He completed his emergency medicine residency training at Jacobi and Montefiore, where he was chief resident. Prior to becoming a physician, he was an EMT in New York City, most prominently with the Central Park Medical Unit, where he now serves as the medical director. He was a rescue worker on 9/11 at the World Trade Center and during the August 2003 Great Northeast Blackout. In addition, he serves as a member of the board of directors of the Regional Emergency Medicine Services Council of New York City, or REMAC. His life's passion is to travel, often by foot, and has hiked the Scottish Highlands throughout Italy, Turkey, the Andes, and Africa, summiting Mount Kilimanjaro. Most recently, he trekked to Tiger's Nest and throughout the Himalayas in Bhutan. He can be seen on Twitter at Treat in Street EM or at Jacobi EM. Dr. Marc Kanter is his neighbor slightly to the south. He's at Lincoln, also in the Bronx, and is the Associate Program Director and Associate Chief of Emergency Medicine at Lincoln. Dr. Kanter has a background in EMS as a pre-hospital provider around New York State, a native New Yorker, completed medical school at New York Medical College, and went on to complete a year of internal medicine residency training in Connecticut. Followed by emergency medicine residency training at Lincoln Medical Center. Marc, where in Connecticut?
Greenwich Hospital.
I did mine at Norwalk, my internship.
Right.
Came back to Lincoln Medical Center, which was the busiest ED in New York State. He's an active participant in the New York chapter and American College of Emergency Physicians, having served on the EMS committee and current academic affairs committee and the tactical EM disaster medicine and trauma injury prevention sections. He's New York City Health and Hospitals representative to New York City REMAC and sits on the system-wide Emergency Management Council. He is an active lecturer and researcher with particular focus on trauma, resuscitation, and airway management. Thank you both very much. I'm really looking forward to this talk, branding and marketing your residency in the virtual era. Thank you very much.
Marianne, thank you so much. Really, it's a great pleasure for both Marc and I to be here. Marc and I know each other pretty well. Like Marianne said, we're neighbors. We both work in the two busiest trauma centers in New York City. So unfortunately, wild Friday nights in the Bronx affect us equally. But we wanted to sort of adopt a little bit more of a casual style today and just please feel free to chime in, ask questions. We're both pretty Zoom savvy. I think we all should be after our virtual interview season we just did. You can throw questions in the chat or you can raise your hand using the buttons on Zoom and get started. Marc, do you have anything else you want to add just to get started? And otherwise?
Nope. Great. It's a great pleasure to see everyone from the CORD community, and let Mike take it away.
Great. I think actually the real pleasure is when we're going to be able to do this in person again. I think that's what we're all dying for. But until then, we're going to talk a little bit about virtual recruiting and what we've been doing for the past, I guess, for the past year, and what our experiences have been in essentially selling two public hospital system residencies in the South Bronx for Marc and sort of the North Bronx for me. So I hope everyone can see my screen, and I'm going to put that on slideshow mode so we can get started. You can tell that that's usually what our recess bays look like. They're a big mess often, and that's not too unusual for us. But today, just branding and marketing, finding residents in a virtual world. Unlike our patients in the Bronx, we have no money. If you have money, we'll happily take it, just not bloodied like that. So we have no financial disclosures to talk about today. For our talk, the next hour, just a couple of really simple objectives. All right, so first, just a very basic, something I think everyone here should be familiar with, but just to reiterate it, understanding the notion of a mission versus a vision and how that interplays into your marketing strategies. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the key complexities that we've experienced this past year. I think we've experienced many, and how we've tackled them. I think each individual institution has come up with unique ideas, and I'd love to hear some of the other things that others have done. We're going to talk a little bit about the available virtual platforms, one obviously that we're on right now, Zoom, but some of the other ways that you can sell your residency to people. And the last piece is just to talk a little bit about pearls and pitfalls in the digital and virtual world. So, well, let's get started. For those of you that don't know, or maybe some of the younger crowd, this is a comic strip, The Far Side, one of my favorites. And I think this is really what we've all felt this year. We have been in utter turmoil for the past, it's been a year. It's incredible that it has been a year. And we also have an incredible responsibility. We have to find the best and the brightest and bring them into our field and into our specialty. And how we do that, how we did that in the past, I think for many of us, we looked at their portfolios, we looked at their ERAS app, but really as a specialty that is very team built, is very personable, we've really heavily relied on those interactions, the opportunity to see a student come and rotate with us, the opportunity to see them, walking into your hospital, finding their way to the emergency department conference room, and how they interacted with the people along the way, and that opportunity to sit down in your office and talk. That really was a key component of how we found incredible emergency physicians. And I think for Marc as well, that's probably how he does it down in the South Bronx. So let's just back up a second and just make sure, and I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. I think when you are trying to sell a product, and I use that word loosely, that is what we're doing. We're trying to sell a product, being a residency, and all of our residencies have certain key components, and yet they're all unique and different and special, and frankly, very amazing. I think in New York City, we have over 25 emergency medicine programs, and I can tell you they all do an amazing job at training, but they all have a unique style, spin, flavor, patient population, and educational style. And I think that is something that's very special in our world. So I think it's important that you recognize that aspect and really just think about who it is and what it is that you do. And so to get to the point of what is a mission versus a vision, I think it's very important that before you start marketing your residency, before you start marketing your program, that you really truly understand those two components, the mission and the vision. The mission, real simply, what do we do? Whom do we serve? And how do we serve them, right? And that's in many aspects, right? That's your community, that's your patient population, but that's also your learners. And so understanding your departmental mission and then your residency division mission, I think is very important before you get into the sort of into the weeds of designing a platform and designing an opportunity to talk about that. Vision, that's the other important thing. I think it's really important to sit down and understand, where do you want to go? Who do you want to be? What do you see your residency being like tomorrow? Your hopes, your dreams, what you're going to do, and how you're going to inspire individuals in the future. Without those two things, I think your program lacks something that is critical. If you don't define those two things, you lack a sense of purpose and meaning, which for me, I found it very easy to be able to talk about what our purpose and what our meaning is. I work at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx, Montefiore Medical Center also in the Bronx. We work in one of the most underprivileged, underserved communities in the country, and we train our physicians, our emergency medicine residents, to work in environments, in austere environments with patients that really have trouble accessing the healthcare system. I can very easily explain that to people and I can show it to them in person. But without defining it and knowing it, it's hard to give that sense of purpose and meaning in this venue. So I really, the very first piece that I think is important is that you clearly delineate what it is you are doing and what it is you would like to do. What is that mission? What is that vision? So that you can have that purpose and meaning when you start to develop a platform and a marketing direction and strategy. Let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about the complexities of the world. I mentioned a lot of it already. I mentioned the fact that we're not seeing people in person. I like to think of myself as a charming, charismatic person. Others would think I'm I realize we're being recorded, so I will watch my mouth. You too, Marc. But that's what I like to think of myself when people meet me in person. I think they know that I'm incredibly passionate about my program. But like we mentioned, it's really very difficult to portray that in a brief virtual interaction. I'm purposely putting my hands up because A, I'm half Italian. You can't tell that from my last name, but B, that's part of my passion is I talk with my hands. But that's hard to see unless you're in person. You don't always see it. And so recognizing that's a complexity in our situation, one that we have to meet and we have to overcome. The fact that many of our students did not rotate anywhere or only at one institution, they only saw their home. My students at Albert Einstein, we had 21 start going into emergency medicine. At the end, there were only 16 that wound up actually applying and all successfully matched. They typically would have gone out and rotated with all of you at wonderful institutions that were different in size, different in practice location, different in location. And this year they couldn't. And so we had them take the opportunity to, instead of spending just 1 month with us, we had them spend 2 months with us. That was a different sort of complexity about dealing with our students who couldn't rotate. When I opened my ERAS on the first day that it was available to me, I saw 1,400 applications. And these are 1,400 individuals who perhaps have never stepped foot in New York City. And I can tell you certainly have most likely never stepped foot in the Bronx. And how do I explain to them what it is, what the Bronx is? Because it's a very special place. It's a very difficult place. And it's very different. So you have to recognize those difficulties. In our world as well, emergency medicine, 2,840 spots filled, 14 unfilled. So remember, we are an incredibly competitive specialty and one that people want to get into. Those are all the things that interlay into this complexity of now recruiting in a virtual world. And so I'm going to pass off to Marc. Marc, I'm just a little curious what you think in terms of how we can meet those issues and how we can do it in a social media heavy world. And then I think it'd be really interesting to hear, because I know you have a little experience at this, how we get into trouble. So.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Like he said, from the North Bronx down to the South, 7 or 8 miles, probably 40 minutes pre-COVID traffic. But I want to spend a few minutes, like Mike said, talking about some different platforms, pearls, pitfalls, some of the different considerations for digital recruiting and branding and like, full disclosure, I should mention I'm on all the major social media platforms. I've been involved in some website designs and whatnot. And I don't want to intentionally sound overly negative with some of the things I'm going to say, or even pessimistic, but there's 272, I think, EM programs out there now. So I do think it's a good starting place to kind of go over especially some of the pitfalls for some of these different issues. So we all know that we live in a digital age. Our audience or our consumers we're talking primarily about medical students, right, that are looking to go into emergency medicine potentially. They're going to be looking for us online, right? And the first thing you think of is a website. And so, for me, when you're thinking about where you're going to build your program's online presence, I start with my first branch point is really, are you dealing with the hospital or the university kind of hosted website, or are you going to go private and homegrown? We know that students are going to search for your programs online. They're going to be wanting to learn a little bit about the people, the place, the things that go into your program's brand. And are you using an institutional website? Are you going to be updating that regularly? Can you? And when I say regularly, I don't mean every 2 years. Do you need to fill out a 2-page form for every line item on every subpage of a website that you want to update? Do you have any say into what can go on that website at all? So for me, that's really the first branch point for most people, and that then takes me into a whole bunch of other kind of sticky topics about going outside of your institution to build your program's online presence. Do you have to ask permission? I'll tell you the answer is probably yes. But are you going to do what many do and proceed cautiously and ask for forgiveness later if it's a problem? For those that don't know, it can be incredibly cheap nowadays to build a website, to get domain names and site hosting space, and even the build. You can get out of the box websites basically pre-built from things like WordPress and Wix and lots of other different places. You probably all have an attending in your shop, and probably multiple residents that have built websites in the past and can do it pretty easily and pretty efficiently. Then we start to get into questions of money, right? Who's going to pay for the domain licenses and the build time, if that you're going to pay for that, and maybe more importantly, the upkeep. Many of us have terrific residents that act as webmasters, but what do you do when that person graduates? Do you find someone else? Who's going to be responsible? Are you going to pay someone to manage your private site? And now in the time of decreasing academic monies, both pre and during COVID, are you going to as leadership pay out of pocket for a website, or do you expect the department or the hospital to fit the bill? And that gets complicated in the world of private websites. So that kind of dovetails me into a topic that I know a little bit about, and some of the regulatory and legal aspects of some of these things. And every one of you, whether you work in a large health system or a small private hospital, big university network, you have a very long, one if not multiple, social media, electronic use type policies, right? That spell out basically everything you are allowed and not allowed to do online, kind of as an employee and whatnot. So think about it. If you're going to use your hospital or your university's brand with that very famous logo, are you going to be allowed to put that on your private site or on your social media account? Is it worth the headache of getting a phone call from a compliance officer or public relations person, basically telling you to cease and desist, and then now what? You're kind of back at square one. So I would always encourage people, despite how incredibly painful it can be, to know where some of those policies are and take a look through them. There will be things in them that you would have never imagined would be there. So I would really strongly encourage you to learn from some of our mistakes and go through those. And I don't think Mike and I are here to kind of explicitly teach you how to build a brand, be it personal or program. And cheap plug, I think you can look up some of the older Cord Connect sessions. Actually, the very two first ones that are on the website and on YouTube have pretty good information about branding, both personally and for a program. And many of you probably heard those lectures, and I think it would be good to take a look at that information, actually. But since I mentioned branding, I will just say one thing that I've learned also along the way, and that is many, if not most, organizations nowadays have branding guidelines and branding manuals. You would never know most of these things exist, but it's literally a book that spells out what font sizes you can use and what colors can be put on what materials and what logos can be adjusted and placed where. The slide you see is the I Love New York decades-long promotional campaign that you've all seen. That's part of their brand. They have a long branding manual that you can read online, and that literally comes from there. But your hospitals and health systems have the same things. And it gets very tricky as we start to get with more of these larger conglomerated health systems what you are or are not allowed to use. And one of the things I think we've seen a lot in the last couple of years is programs coming up with their own nicknames for their programs and using that as either a social media handle or a website domain name, rather, to kind of get you away from using the, the hospital or university systems kind of well-established logo. And, that could be a challenge depending on how you're trying to brand your program. Interestingly, just in the last, I don't know, month or so, Mike, I think we work at least partly in the same health system, and we're not allowed to access private email anymore or private file sharing services, which I'm sure most of you or many of you have started to deal with around the country. A lot of that comes from ransomware issues and the growing concern of cybersecurity. But I'll give you, without giving a lot of detail about the specifics, I know very well of a program that had their own private, homegrown residency website. One of the residents went on that site to look for something in the middle of a Saturday night overnight. And they pulled up the site on a hospital computer and found the most horrific, insulting imagery, anti-Semitic, discriminatory language and words and whatnot on that website. And thankfully, the webmaster was able to pull that down in the middle of the night, and they rebuilt the website, and it happened again. So then they had to scrap their website and their domain and start totally from scratch. So I would caution everyone that in the coming months, years, et cetera, that many of our websites that people make from scratch may not be accessible from your hospital or med school computers. As these networks start to get more savvy about locking down what people can see at work, if it hasn't happened already, just be mindful of that. And we're going to probably have to reinvent ourselves a little bit, in the next couple of years with that kind of specifically in mind.
Marc, if I could, can I interject real quick? Just sorry, because I see a question that's in the chat from Tim Fallon, and I think you're kind of touching on it right now, so maybe we can answer it now a bit. But Tim asked a question about working, what you're mentioning, working with hospitals and GME to create social media policies that actually work for residencies and for recruitment. And it gets to the point of what you were saying is hospitals are in the business of restricting and protecting, and they look at this as all employees, not just us, and we recruit a different type of employees. So do you have any ideas or thoughts about how we can work in those realms to create policies and create portfolios that actually work for what we need to do?
Yeah, this really, really challenging. And I think if I've probably looked at literally hundreds of different residency websites, both EM and non-EM. I'm trying to get ideas and see what people are doing. And, it absolutely runs the gambit from, programs that probably have three different, the program has their own wiki site, they have their own private site, and then they have the hospital site, and all, back to programs only allowed to use the residency, the hospital run site. I don't see, to be, very frank about it, I don't see a lot of wiggle room with most organizations nowadays with changing their policies in this area, especially because of the recent concerns with cybersecurity. I do think, oftentimes GME offices are willing to work with you to let you put up content that is acceptable. So, when you look at websites, what are the things that, the bare minimum that things most places have, right? They have something about the program director, some resident names, where they rotate, the curriculum, and, and then you advance after that, right? To some places, including things about mission and vision, what the program stands for. And, but in the last year, things have changed a little bit, right? People have put virtual tours on their websites. They've put videos from their residents and programs kind of selling the virtues of the program. They've put how staff contract information on websites for applicants to see, kind of open access. It really puts you deep into a rabbit hole of legal and regulatory and cybersecurity that most of us want nothing to do with. So one thing that I would say is try not to make the mistake of what some of us have already done, and start simple. You want things that, at least the bare minimum, make it look good, and then, make it simple and easy to update, probably even most importantly, with the necessary things that you want to get across. So we know that like in the last say 5+ years, it's become very popular to put clinical or blog posts on our websites, be it privately or, network hosted. And that's all fine. But I would say when you start adding content, things like blog posts, and, some personal information about residents and things like that, I would take a look at take a step back and decide what it is that you really want to be there. Do we really need, forgive the example, but do we need 272 residency websites with like blog posts about Reboa and ECMO that every resident wants to write? I mean, take a step back and think about why you're actually doing it. If you're doing it because you have a teaching resident rotation and you want to give your resident experience in writing and getting things online, cool, go for it. If you're doing it because you think it drives traffic to your site, I would question that a little bit. I would really step back and say, what are the things that the bare minimum of things that you want out there about your program that kind of show your brand to the people that you want to drive there. And if you kind of whittle it down a little bit, I think some compliance officers and some GME officers are much more willing to work with you. And, that kind of leads me naturally, I guess, into social media. Because the reality is that in this world that we live in 2021, people spend their lives online on social media, right? And, when you want to market to people, you market to where they are going to be looking for things. So rather than just looking at websites, I do think it's important to have a social media presence. And, Facebook is still the behemoth of social media, but probably not so much for recruiting, because most of our younger learners are not spending as much time on Facebook. I think Twitter has become the place where most programs are putting their energy. Instagram kind of a little bit more recently has become more popular. And then, we have some programs out there that use Snapchat and TikTok to try and get out their message to people that are, looking. And
Marc,
then
are you telling me that I should turn off my MySpace page?
Listen, if you still have it, own it. No one will find it. But and I expect Mike to be on TikTok later tonight. So
now,
there's lots of faculty out there, not lots, but maybe some small number of faculty that have a presence on Reddit and even on Student Doctor Network. And you can decide where to put your energy, but I would say, again, as someone that has been involved in learning lessons the hard way a bit, you really need to take a very close look at kind of the regulatory and legal aspects of who's doing the posting and what the content is. This is where your compliance people, your GME offices, et cetera, will burn you, because the biggest concern is always HIPAA. But if you go back and look at some of the policies that I mentioned, there will be other legalities in there that you never thought about, that are incredibly easy to violate. And it's actually surprisingly easy to have a HIPAA violation with a social media post, right? We know that our residents, I know our residents, and I definitely know Mike's residents, are very passionate about their program, right? They want to tell the cool story about a case they saw, about a crazy procedure they did last, weekend. But that's how we all have gotten into trouble over time in the last, 5 or 10 years. Some pretty serious trouble. I think there are, I could give you hundreds, literally, case studies of of people either getting fired or losing their, residency spots, et cetera, over social media posts. And I certainly, I don't want to be that negative guy, but you want to get your program out there, right? And you want to drive traffic to your program and to your site. But you definitely have to take a step back and really think about who's doing the posting and what are they posting. And, I've thought a lot about this lately. The last year, for a lot of reasons, has been crazy. But in terms of like residency online presence and recruiting, it's kind of the Wild West, right? We've all been forced to make sure we have good websites with all the necessary program info that they may have otherwise gotten from us in person. But something else that happened in the last year is that a lot of residents and faculty, some privately, some under the umbrella of their organizations, have really posted very aggressively on social media about COVID cases they've seen, lessons learned, PPE concerns, health policy issues. That's a big thing for the last like 12 months. And it seems to me at least that some, not all, some health systems have really kind of turned the other way and turned a blind eye to that because there were much bigger fish to fry. But I can tell you, last week, there was a case that made international news from the US of residents that posted, not EM, thankfully, posted a picture in an OR that many found to be either not so tasteful or unprofessional. So I do think the cat's going to go back in the bag a little bit, so to speak, with that. So, I think you go back to some of the things Mike was talking about. You go back to looking at who rotates at your program. Who do you want rotating at your program? Who do you want applying and interviewing at your program? Who do you match at your program? Who do you want to reach? And what are the things you want out there in essentially a permanent digital age about your place and about your people? And is the traffic driven to a website worth it if you're going to have some conversation with an HR or your legal or CEO to save someone's job? So, everything's a cautionary tale. We're in this weird kind of transitional digital age where things are changing so rapidly. But, that leads me to my question for Mike, and I'd be interested, I'm sure others on the call have some thoughts on this. In the last year, everything asynchronous has basically exploded, right? What are some of the things we've seen? We've seen programs all over the country building and rebuilding websites from scratch, major social media presence from programs that have never been on social media before, video tours, in-depth video tours of EDs, videos, from residents, detailing things about the program. We've had virtual rotations. We've had not only for core EM, but for subspecialties rotations. We've had virtual and online resident social gatherings for applicants, open forums, some things just for interviewees. We've had lots of virtual program-specific Q&A sessions highlighting specific things about some of your departments. We've had visitors for journal clubs and for conferences. We've had people, probably more than ever in history, archiving residency conference from Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams onto Vimeo and YouTube. And then we've also had residency fairs virtually, which seem to be continuing. So Mike, where do we go from here? What sticks? What are our consumers going to think, expect out of us in 2021 and beyond? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. I think actually before I catch that, Tim, I apologize. I saw you had your hand up before and wanted to grab your question. So
no, that's okay. This is great and helpful. And I'm looking for your perspective or others in the group. Our social media policy at our institution was written in 2014 and references MySpace. And as you've discussed, it's very much a policy that applies to every employee. And the crux is don't associate yourself with our institution at all. And anything that you do that associates you with this institution could be a violation. So, and then you look at other institutions and, just to like randomly throw in, if you look at, right, Stanford very clearly embraces the message of we're going to get a message out there. We're going to talk about social justice with the Stanford name. There are plenty of EM programs doing that. That's just like a name that comes to mind. Are there success stories with how we create social media policies that are allowing us to use social media as opposed to just restricting us? And then what are the logistics too? Like I can't access any of these from my computer. So all day, every day is work PC, MacBook, my personal MacBook on my desk. And like, if there are places that have had success and have social media policies they could share, that would be really helpful, because we're at a point of trying to feel like we need to create a policy that we can take to the hospital and say, look, this is something that we could work with.
I think I think it's a great observation, really great question. I think the answer is sort of what you said. Is I would personally go out there and just kind of peruse some of the programs and just see who has had some good, who's had strong success. I think I've had a little bit of success with this because mostly my organization is too big to pay attention. And I think places, you mentioned one program that I think has had to some degree success. And I think that's because they have really solid forward-thinking leadership, not just within their department and their health system, but their university entity understands, look, it's an institution in Silicon Valley. I think they get tech. I hope they do. So I think that would be my sort of observation and thoughts. And policies written in 2014, they don't address the issues of today. And social media has drastically changed from what it was when it first started. So I don't have a great answer, but
I think you can find, thankfully, you can find a lot of organizations, social media, electronic use policies, et cetera, online. So you can find examples online, and you can ask friends to send you theirs. I think honestly, you're going to find that many of them are equally as restrictive. People just are allowed, either they're allowed to operate sort of on the fringe of, the policy, or they do it with, full knowledge of what could be a problematic situation. Like I said, I just think that, if you come up, usually if you come up with something that you think is reasonable as a proposal, it might be taken a little bit better than, hey, your policy legal counsel is out of date, can you update it? Because you're not going to get what you want. They're not going to include, Mike's TikTok sessions on there.
I keep thinking I'm on TikTok. I don't know how to dance. Let's be honest. I don't know how to do anything.
I'm building a brand.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry. So Tim, I truthfully, I mean, I've spent a lot of time digging through this. I've talked to places and a lot of different people in a lot of different systems. And like I said, some places work around it by not mentioning the organization's name and using a quote unquote kind of nickname for their brand. I think it's going to take years for some of these organizations to catch up with some of these policies, but I'll also say that there's been enough horror stories, or at least what the organization considers a horror story, of violations of the policies, not necessarily from us, but from anyone in the organization, that they're not always so quick to understand why we need to care about this. And some places are just going to get stuck, not, having to wait. Because there's, for the hundreds of case studies of people being reprimanded, fired, et cetera, over social media violations, there's probably an equal number that have never, that don't get publicized, because organizations don't publicize that sort of thing. I spoke to a lawyer about this, and he's like, sorry, like, I could talk to some of my lawyer friends, but no one publicizes that their doctors are getting fired for violating social media policies. So it's a really tough it's a tough thing that we're, like I said, I view this as kind of a transitionary period where the learners and the younger people in society all expect certain social media presence. and we work for very big entities, most of us nowadays, and it's really hard to navigate. Like I said, in the last 5 or 10 years, I think most organizations, people have just asked for forgiveness if someone makes a mistake, rather than try and come up with a proactive, forward-thinking policy. But
I'm all into the ask for forgiveness policy. That's been my mantra. But Mark, I think you're right. It doesn't. The organizations are far behind, and they haven't met the times yet, unfortunately. You mentioned the big entities. Maybe some of you guys saw there was a New York Times article by Nick Kristof that looked at some of the emergency departments where my residents work, and actually, unfortunately, looked at one of my residents who was sick with COVID. And I will tell you, you look at the story. It's a like all of Nick's stories, I think a story of struggle and hardship, and trying to get a good message to the American public, and the hoops that had to be jumped through just to get him to on the phone were just incredible. I had to go all the way up the chain, all the way back down the chain, and that was for something polished, professional from the New York Times, a really wonderful, well-respected author and journalist. So our organizations are just not there yet, and I think that kind of leads a little bit into Marc's question, which is where do we go from here? And then also I see Marianne Howish is the question of how do we differentiate ourselves? And I think that perhaps is where we go from here. I ran interview season and all of our recruiting virtually, 325 interviews that I did by Zoom of, hi, nice to meet you, tell me your story. I will tell you my favorite piece of doing this by Zoom is that there's no more of the, really nice to meet you, great to see you, and, the knock on the door, and then the applicant saying, wait, I just have one more question. Nope, the Zoom window shuts down and they're out. So I love that piece of it, but the rest of it's really, it is missing. So the question, where do we go? And I think we can kind of break it down perhaps into two portions. One is what we do to market, and the other is how we conduct recruiting next year, because I think that is a bit of our marketing. So the branding notion, Marianne asks the question, how do we separate ourselves? We all have the same RRC requirements. We all have the same, we have to do X number of ICU times, this amount of PEDS time. You have to do this number of procedures. It's all the same. And we all provide it. And we do a great job, but we all have a little bit something different. Marc has a really, really heavy knife and gun club down in the South Bronx. I have some of that, but I also have pretty extensive high-speed motor vehicle trauma, but we both have trauma. That's something we both market. And I think the way you brand is you think about what's special. We all know for each residency, there is one thing that is special, our people. And that's really the thing that differentiates so many of us, our people and our places. And so I think that is one of the things that going forward is really important to branding, is creating some window into the people of your organization and some window into the location, understanding the complexities and the legalities that Marc mentioned, as well as the issues of not breaking the law, not breaking the rules that the system sets down. So that would be one important aspect of going forward, making certain your social media presence incorporates that. The other piece in terms of the branding, I think some of that is in your website design, how you denote your requirements versus your special things, right? So Marianne has a wonderful program that she's at in Long Island, where they have a whole program that they encourage some of their residents to stick around for a 1-year fellowship, and encourage them, that they will be strongly supported in that decision throughout their 3 years, and then that 4th year will be supported. So that's something special that you can put out there. And then I think, Marc, your question of the other piece is what's next, and that breaks down For me, interview season's already started. I've already interviewed my 16 Einstein students that are starting up soon, and I've already sat down and talked with them. I've already started to form opinions about them. We'll get them in on our rotation and go from there. But I'm gonna be honest. I'm probably going to be one of the first people to say it. I'm not going backwards. I am not giving up this Zoom format of interviews because I think it promotes a greater access, a greater degree of equity and inclusion. It's environmentally friendly, and it's missing one piece, and that's the ability for them to see you. And that is, I think, a big part of the marketing and the recruitment aspect. And so I'm going to move forward with video interviews by Zoom and open tour dates that our students will be able, if they happen to be in New York and want to come up and check out the hospital, they're welcome to. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing. We'll see how it works. I will also let you know how my interns are this July 1. That's really going to be the deciding factor. So that's a little bit of going forward. Marc, what else do you think going forward?
Yeah, I think we've, in some of the various forums I think we participated in, I think, some places are going to stick with an occasional virtual conference day. Let the residents and the faculty call in from home. Maybe once a month or once a quarter. But that also, it does allow you to let more people, have that window into, kind of your teaching program and whatnot, rather than strictly, in-person conference only for those that are rotating. I do think that piece very likely may stick around for a lot of programs. Similarly, I don't know about, the resident socials with the applicants. I'm sure they would much rather prefer to do that in person in the coming year. But I think there were some really amazing program, like I mentioned, Q&As around the country that let applicants hear about specific things about their programs, be it subspecialty education things or efforts in diversity and inclusion for underrepresented students and everything in between. I think that's a really good recruiting tool. Again, 270 programs doing that, every, Tuesday, Wednesday night, whatever, hard for applicants to sort through. So that kind of takes us back a little bit to Marianne's question, but yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a new problem either, the branding, right? How do you differentiate 20 some odd programs in the New York, almost 30, I think now, programs in the New York region. But similarly around the country, how do you, I don't think that's necessarily a new problem. I think maybe it's a little bit easier now that we have more of an online presence and, the leadership team gets to, I do think, many of us probably don't think of ourselves as marketers or branders. And I certainly thought that, the first time I heard Mike Gisandi and Jeremy Branzetti talking about this topic, I certainly, didn't think of myself in that world, but it really is a lot of what we do. And having your group, including some of your, residents, sit down and really take a very hard look at what you're about. What are the few things that you really want to get out there about your place and about your program, and make a slick website and put it on Twitter, I guess. For now,
Marianne,
yeah.
Yeah, your hand up.
Actually, yeah, I do. I would actually challenge that we could do a lot more with branding. And I think that as a specialty, obviously, of enormous things that join us, but if you're going to look at a program, it's hard because you're both in very similar programs, and my program's a little bit different than yours, but we're all New York programs. But I think that that going forward, given that we may have limited ability to have people come and see what's going on, whether because we choose to do Zoom interviews because it's more convenient, or we are forced to do Zoom interviews because there's still some measure of concerns going on. I think it really behooves us to be fair to the incoming classes to really try to represent ourselves very completely. Now, that's going to be identify the things that we really like about our programs. Marc's got the Knife and Gun Club. Mike has Knife and Gun and Car. You know, I have some other stuff, but I think that we are all, you know, decent friends, I think also. And by pointing out what we do well at our individual shops does not disparage other people. And I think that going forward, in order to be fair to the people who are applying to us, it does require some introspection to say, you know, what's great about our place? It's the people. We all say that, but then what else? Really think about it and really try to identify so you can come up with what are the elements of the brand of the place that you're getting. We can't do it as easily now with kind of the intangibles of, oh, we're meeting 20 people today and this person makes sense. But I think that that's behooved, the weight of that is on us and requires some real insight and depth in how we think about it.
I think, Marianne, I think that's a really very insightful thought and idea is that you're right. We all do say people because we all love our people, right? And digging into that a little deeper and finding some other aspects of your program, I think, are important. Marc asked earlier, you know, where do I see this going? And I have to be honest, this past year, I looked at all of the, you know, the CORD residency fairs, the AAM residency fair, the ASAP residency fair, the New York Regional residency fair, all these different virtual platforms. And, you know, I sort of looked at it and said, geez, this is going to be a lot of time. And I just don't know how much bang for buck I'm going to get. And perhaps I was actually pleasantly surprised because students popped in and out of my rooms in all these different events and opportunities. They asked insightful questions. And what I realized is they were also asking the exact same questions of Marc, of Marianne, of Tim, of everyone here. And they were gauging us on our responses and how they are slightly nuanced and different. So I think one of the things going forward, because we won't have that opportunity to show who we are on a visits, perhaps over the next year, we need to come up with different ways to show who we are in those platforms. Next year, I've made a really, A, just because I'm tired of wearing this headsets, but B, I think it's important that applicants see my whole team. And so I've really made a concerted effort to make certain that they are all freed up for some of these events to be the voice of our program and offer a slightly different spin. Marc, what do you think?
Yeah, you know, Mike and I share similar feelings about the residency fair recruiting over the years and you know, the effectiveness of that model. And you know, I agree. I do think that, you know, a lot of really good applicants probably matched at some of our programs because of, like Mike said, the questions that they asked. I'm just looking at Peter Moffitt's comment about, you know, their post-applicant survey, and you know, all programs basically saying they're great at wellness and they're great at trauma and they value diversity and they great training, which, you know, may or may not be true. And certainly, you know, that, I mean, that's really no different than any marketing manager, branding expert, right? They spin what they want to spin to sell who they want to sell to, whatever their product is. And again, you know, we could all do that, and like Peter said, you know, basically let all the applicants, you know, spin a wheel and pick a program that way. I hope that, you know, as kind of Mike mentioned, that, you know, the combination of kind of more online presence, some virtual, Q&As, a little bit more access to, conference and maybe even some of the subspecialty rotations, right? Let some students rotate with your talk service from across the country and get a feel for some of your people. In addition to starting to open up for things like, in-person tours or second looks and getting ways to have residents and meet your applicants and faculty meet your applicants. I think the hybrid model is kind of the way to go forward. And I do think that going forward that the applicants may actually know a little bit more about the programs than they did before, right? Mike's probably always gotten over 1,000 applications for his program, and they have tons of rotators that go through their program. So they know a lot of people, but there's still a lot of people that, are just, going based on what they find online. I do think that this past year has caused us to kind of create some new avenues and allow people a little bit more access to some of our people that we all think are so amazing, and some of the things we do in our program. And then some of it's going to be the same old, spin the wheel thing too.
Hey, long-time listener, first-time caller. I was hoping so if you're assigning value to this, are you making it a chief resident role? Are you putting a faculty member in charge of your web presence? What have you assigned money to it? How do you value this, and what resources are you putting toward it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. Thanks for joining, and love the photo. I finally, by the way, Tom, I got your office wall painted last week, finally. So,
oh, thank God.
Yeah, but that's a great question, and I think there is value in this. What you assign to it, at a very minimum. I stalk our social media platforms regularly because I let my chief residents run it, but I want to make certain they don't run afoul. And I make certain that they have very clear guidelines from the start about what is okay and what is not okay. The departments, we do put money towards our website. Obviously, we have the institutional site that's covered by the institution, and then we have our own little side site, and that's has money assigned to it. So there's value there. To one of the points that Marc made earlier about the applicants, how they used to not be so savvy and now they are savvy and know all about us. I remember last year in-person interviews, somebody asked me about my global health program and where do I see its future? And I said, well, its future isn't actually starting it because I don't have one. And this year I have applicants who are asking me drilled down questions on, so tell me about, your exact number. I notice you have this number of elective blocks. How do you fill them? And I said, I don't know how many elective blocks I have. I have to look at the schedule to remember. So I think there is value for them in terms of being able to know more about you and perhaps in some ways know some of the nitty-gritty details about you, even more than you do. So to circle back to your question, Tom, value, there needs to be faculty overseeing, some degree of faculty overseeing it, and there needs to be some reasonable amount of dollars and cents applied to it. Yeah, Marc, you agree?
Yeah, I think it's pretty common to let that residents run social media accounts nowadays. I think there's a couple of programs I know of a few that assign a chief resident as one of their roles to manage an account, be it Twitter, Instagram, whatever. I think that's fine. I think high-level program leadership, if not departmental leadership, has to sit down with the very limited number of people that have access to social media accounts and lay the groundwork stone cold up front. This is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and here's the policy, just so you know. And it can't be an entire class of residents that have access to your Instagram account. It really should be a limited number of people and set the groundwork. From the website perspective, there's so many talented residents out there that that have businesses building websites and incredibly impressive resumes in computer science, and they're really talented. And they could build you a site probably better than some of the people you would pay to do it. But I think, yeah, I think that some small amount of money needs to go towards that if you're allowed. You know, if you're at an institution where you're not allowed to have a side site, then save the money. But I do think some money goes into that. I think, like I mentioned before, if you create the site well, it looks good, and it only needs updating a couple times a year at most, then I don't think you need to pay anyone to maintain it for you necessarily. I think, you know, if you have some other goals that you want frequent updating and, you know, a blog site associated with it, et cetera, you may have to either grant someone some time to deal with that, as some departments around the country have, or money. Let's see. So Peter
Marc,
asked
do
about,
you have a good answer to that question? I'm going to say I don't. I've heard of people doing it. I know Pick Mukherjee has done that, but I don't know if you know more details about it.
About the social media management suite. That's a really good question. I don't. I know, yeah, I've heard of a bunch of the different programs. I think Peter mentioned Hootsuite. I personally haven't dealt with that. I think most people probably just do it kind of off the cuff and ad hoc. I think there are a lot of programs that, yeah, you can schedule all of your posts ahead of time. I know of a few programs that do that in a very scheduled way. But yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with that. But it is a way, you know, again, it is a way to schedule the content delivery in a little bit of a safer way. So it's really not a bad idea to look at. Yeah, later.
Yeah, I'm seeing some suggestions in the chat for those that aren't able to see it or not looking. Hootsuite and then later.com seem to be two suggestions that might work. So,
yep.
You know, one of the other things that I found it very interesting, I just learned that our Department of Medicine has a media manager for their entire department. So maybe as we get bigger, this will become a role within our programs to be able to help manage those aspects. I do see that we're running a little towards the end on time. I think we like to keep these towards an hour. I don't know, Marc, if you have any final thoughts or if anybody has any questions, we could take a couple of questions and then, you know, drive it home.
I think we hit all the big topics. I mean, I think we'll learn some more things, you know, at the upcoming CORD meeting, and then certainly by next year, I think we'll probably have a totally different talk to give, because a lot of this will change, just like the technology has changed so much in the last couple of years. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear what some other people are doing and how they value this. But I'll take one last time to plug one of the comments Marianne made, and that is the real kind of introspection about your program and really taking a look at, you know, the things that you value, the things that you want to put out there, because, you know, we're not all, I think Mike's and Marianne, they come from two of the largest programs, if not the largest programs in the country. Most of the other 270 programs are much smaller. They don't have as many people to do as many tasks. So you really want to do what is the biggest bang for your buck, right? So, you know, sitting down and really looking at what your program values and what you want to kind of market yourself as doesn't take a lot of time, and it lets you kind of narrow your focus a bit so that everyone's not doing everything in every program, because it's just not sustainable. And then you wind up with a resident going onto a website that hasn't been updated in 3 years, and it's very obvious, and that's a turnoff to, you know, the generation of people that are applying to our program. So that's basically it.
So if I understand, some of the summary points are, make sure that you know what the policy is. Sorry, seems Charlotte has some opinions. Charlotte. The summary points that I understand are, make sure that you're, that you understand the policy of your organization. Make sure that you don't have to get a resident fired over putting stuff up on the internet in some shape, some form. I think that there are significant differences. Although we share much, there are differences within our program. Try to make sure that we hit the high points of what those differences are, so that we can be fairer as people are coming to interview at our programs and try to figure out what it is exactly they're going to be getting into for the next 3 or 4 years. We all value the people that we work with, and that's often the best part of our program. But you know, how can we delineate who those people are? Perhaps are most of our people married, not married, partnered, not partnered? You know, we're looking at people who are going to be looking at where they're going to spend the next 3 or 4 years, where they may be making some important life decisions. If you're in the midst of a city and you're attracting a young single crowd that wants to go out and spend time in the city, that may be an important factor that's different from if you're in, and I'm sorry, because I'm such a New Yorker, so I'm arbitrarily picking Iowa, you know, a quiet place in Iowa where the majority of the people are married and partnered and want to have something where they have decent opportunities for their children and or their spouses, to the spouses maybe to have employment, and for the children to have good schools and the rest of it. So those are all different factors that are important in thinking about what does your program offer. So as much as we share, we also want to make sure that we can think carefully and talk about what our distinctions are, and then figure out a venue in which we can put that information out there, so that those who are searching and trying to figure out where they want to be in emergency medicine can kind of have some guidance rather than applying to 1,400 programs because they exist. Fair?
That's pretty fair. I would add one other thing. I think in every one of these discussions and every way that you present your program, really try to hone in on what it is that gives your program purpose and meaning, and why it is you're still there. I think that's, at least for me, that's a big part of why am I still here, and how does that give purpose and meaning to applicants. And I make certain that that comes through in all of our modalities, whether social media, virtual forums, interviews, websites, etc. So,
Well, Mike, clearly it's because of the excellent paint job that they did after a few years. That's what's holding you there, I'm sure.
that's absolutely it. So, Marianne, thank you for the invites. I also think would like to thank Tina for setting this all up. It's wonderful, just the background tech stuff that's everyone at Cord is doing. It's really helpful. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Mike and Marc, both for coming on today, and thanks for everybody who attended. It will be recorded, or it is recorded, and it will be put up sometime in the next couple days on the Cord website, so you can share it with your friends if they did not get to see it. And then next month, we will be talking about wellness in the time of COVID with Dr. Chris Doty. We are firming up the day. It's either going to be, I believe, the 22nd or 29th, but we'll send out some information. Stay well, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Marianne. Good to see everyone.
Take care, Mike.
Hope to
Good
see you all
seeing
soon in person.